Daniel Kessler didn't even sit down when he told me I was no longer head of integration. He stood in my doorway, one hand on the glass frame like he owned the building, the other holding a printed memo with my name on it. Not a conversation, not a transition meeting. Just a quiet announcement dressed up as strategy. "Scarlett," he said, in that calm, practiced tone people use when they think they're being generous, "we're restructuring for agility." I was still holding my coffee. It had already gone cold. "My name is Scarlett Marlowe," I said, because people like Daniel liked to shorten things they didn't respect. Head of integration and vendor continuity, he smiled like I'd just confirmed his point. "Formerly, we're moving you into a support-aligned role. You'll be sitting with the integration assistants for now." For now. That phrase always means permanently. I looked past him. My nameplate was already gone from the door. The metal screws were still warm, like someone had removed it minutes ago. Inside my office, my chair had been turned slightly to the side. Not by me. There was a cardboard file box on my desk. He didn't ask me to sit. He didn't offer an explanation beyond agility. He just stepped aside and pointed toward the open floor. "Let me introduce you to Ryan," he said, nodding toward a young guy in a tailored jacket standing near the shared desks. "He'll be taking over integration leadership." Fresh perspective. Ryan gave me a polite smile, the kind you give someone you've been told is no longer relevant. I had trained people like him for years. I didn't move right away. I just watched Daniel, the way he avoided eye contact for more than 2 seconds. The way the memo in his hand wasn't signed by legal. The way there was no board acknowledgement line at the bottom. He hadn't looped them in. That was mistake number 1. "I'll need you to hand off vendor access," he continued, already turning away like the conversation was done. "We'll handle the rest through HR. I finally spoke. Have you filed the continuity reassignment notice?" He paused, just enough to show he didn't recognize the phrase. Then he waved it off. "Legal will handle anything like that later," he said. "Right now we just need speed. Speed." I nodded once. That answer told me everything I needed to know. If you've ever seen someone step on a pressure plate without realizing it, that's what it looked like. Before this goes any further, take a second and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated at work. These stories aren't about drama, they're about patterns. And once you see them, you don't forget them. I picked up the box. It was lighter than it should have been. Someone had already removed half my files. When I walked out, the floor felt colder. The shared desk they'd assigned me was wedged between 2 junior analysts. No privacy. No monitors configured for my systems, just a docking station and a chair that didn't adjust properly. I sat down anyway. I plugged in my laptop. The screen lit up, and within seconds the notification started. Access restricted. Vendor portal permissions removed. Integration dashboard read only. Continuity control panel locked. The system had already processed my demotion faster than Daniel had. I didn't react. I didn't call anyone. I didn't argue. I took out my phone, snapped a photo of the screen, and saved it. Timestamp included. Then I logged out. Around me, people kept working. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, normal office noise. No one looked at me for more than a second. That was the part people always missed. The silence. I closed my laptop slowly and placed it in the box. They thought they had moved me to a smaller desk. What they had actually done was trigger something they didn't even know existed. And once it starts, it doesn't stop halfway. I didn't start at Virexin in a leadership role. I built my way into one that didn't have a clean title. When I first joined, integration wasn't a department. It was a problem people passed around when something broke. Vendors blamed engineering, engineering blamed finance, finance blamed contracts, and contracts blamed misalignment. I stopped calling it misalignment. I called it dependency because every system we used depended on something else. Every vendor had a clause, every client had a condition. Every delay had a cost that no one tracked properly. So I started tracking it. I mapped out every vendor connection we had, who approved what, which systems needed manual overrides, which clients required named contacts for compliance, which contracts had continuity language buried in the fine print. No one asked me to do it. But once I did, everything started working. Projects stopped stalling. Clients stopped escalating. Finance stopped losing money on missed timelines they couldn't explain. And slowly, without anyone announcing it, I became the person everything moved through, not because I was loud, because I was precise. When the buyout started, the one that pushed us to a $1.2 billion valuation, everything ran through integration. New systems, new vendors, new legal structures, cross-border compliance, data migration. It was a mess waiting to happen. Unless someone held the full picture. That someone was me. I sat in rooms I wasn't invited to. Not physically, structurally. Finance needed my numbers to justify timelines. Legal needed my documentation to draft continuity clauses. Operations needed my approvals to move forward. I wasn't presenting slides. I was writing the parts of the deal no one could afford to get wrong. And because of that, I learned something most executives never do. Where the system actually breaks. Daniel didn't know any of that. He arrived 6 months after the buyout closed. Clean suit. Perfect resume. The kind of background that looks strong on paper and shallow in practice. He talked about speed, about innovation, about cutting legacy drag. I was legacy, not because I was outdated, because I knew where everything was buried. He didn't ask me for a handover plan. He didn't ask for risk mapping. He didn't ask which vendors required named authorization to function. He saw dashboards. I saw dependencies. There's a difference. I had trained people under me for years. Some of them were good. A few of them were excellent. But none of them had the full structure in their head. Because the structure wasn't written in one place. It lived across contracts, emails, vendor agreements, and decisions made in rooms that never made it into official notes. And I was the only person who had followed all of it from start to finish. I never advertised that. I didn't need to. The system spoke for me. Until someone decided to silence it. When Daniel called me support, it wasn't just disrespect. It was a misunderstanding of what support actually meant. Support isn't the bottom of the structure. It's what holds it up. And the moment he removed me without understanding that, he didn't just change my title. He removed the one person who knew how to keep everything from coming apart. The only question left was how long it would take before he realized it, and by then it wouldn't be something he could fix with a meeting. There's a difference between owning a system and understanding it. And there's an even bigger difference between signing a deal and reading every line that makes it real. During the buyout, most people focused on valuation, revenue multiples, growth projections, market expansion. I focused on failure points because when a system grows fast, it doesn't break where people expect. It breaks where no one documented the risk. That's where I worked. And that's how I ended up funding part of the deal, not publicly, not loudly, quietly. A silent equity position structured through a founder-backed agreement that most people treated like a formality. It wasn't. The clause was called CCP 17. Continuity control provision. It lived deep inside the acquisition framework, attached to the integration appendix, the part everyone skimmed because it wasn't strategic, it was operational, which meant it was mine. The clause was simple when you stripped away the legal language. If a designated continuity holder was removed, reassigned, or restricted without formal transition, and that removal created operational risk, temporary control rights could shift to the continuity stakeholder. Not permanently, just long enough to stabilize the system. But in a company like Virexin, even temporary control was everything. My name was written into that clause, not as an employee, as a condition. I didn't design it for power. I designed it because I didn't trust future leadership to respect what they didn't understand. I had seen too many systems collapse under executives who thought replacing people was the same as replacing function. So I made sure there was a cost, a structural one. Daniel never saw it. Or if he did, he didn't understand it. Because to him, integration was a department. To me, it was the spine of the entire operation, and CCP-17 was the nerve that reacted when that spine was damaged. After I left the shared desk, I didn't go home. I went to the one place in the building no one thought to monitor, the archive room. It wasn't dramatic, just rows of labeled storage, old contract binders, and a terminal that still had full document access because no one had updated its permissions. I logged in. My credentials still worked there. That was the second mistake. I pulled up the acquisition framework, section by section, page by page, not because I needed to read it again, but because I needed to confirm timestamps. When exactly had my access been restricted? When exactly had my role been changed? When exactly had the system recognized that change? Because CCP-17 didn't activate on intention, it activated on proof. And proof lives in timestamps. I cross-referenced everything. My badge access logs, system permissions, internal directory changes. They had already created the conditions. They just hadn't noticed. I opened a folder I hadn't touched in months. Continuity enforcement. Inside were drafts, notes, and a checklist I built during the buyout. Not because I expected to use it, but because I planned for what happens when people ignore warnings. Each item was simple. Was there a formal reassignment notice? No. Was there a documented transition plan? No. Were vendors notified of a change in authorized contact? No. Was there measurable operational risk? That part was starting. I leaned back in the chair and looked at the screen. Daniel thought he had moved me to a smaller desk. What he had actually done was remove a named continuity holder without process, which meant the system wasn't just strained, it was now in violation of its own governance structure. And once that happens, it doesn't stay internal for long. I saved the logs, exported the files, backed them up in 3 places. Then I closed the folder. There's a moment in every system failure where it could still be stopped. We had already passed that moment. Daniel just didn't know it yet. I didn't confront Daniel. There was no point. People like him don't hear warnings. They hear resistance. So I gave him none. Instead, I started documenting. The first email I sent was simple, neutral, almost boring. Subject: Continuity Reassignment Confirmation. I addressed it to legal with a soft CC to compliance. Hi, just confirming whether a formal continuity reassignment notice has been filed following recent role changes within integration and vendor continuity. Please advise on documentation status and effective timestamp. No accusations, no tone, just a question that required a real answer. I already knew what that answer would be. But what mattered wasn't the response. It was the record. While that email sat in their inbox, I moved to the next step. System logs. I pulled access reports showing the exact moment my permissions were downgraded. Vendor dashboards, integration controls, escalation channels. Each one had a timestamp. Each one told the same story. Removal without transition. I saved everything. Then I started reaching out to vendors. Not with complaints, not with warnings, with clarification. Hi, just checking. Can you confirm current authorized integration contact on your side for Virexin? We're reviewing alignment post-restructure. Again, neutral. But vendors are careful. They don't guess when contracts are involved. Within hours, replies started coming in. Your name is listed. No update received. Please confirm if there has been a formal change. There hadn't been. Because Daniel moved fast. Faster than process. Faster than documentation. Faster than the systems that actually kept things running. And every unanswered vendor question became another data point. Another piece of proof. Meanwhile, from my shared desk, I watched the floor shift. Ryan was already in meetings he didn't understand. I could hear pieces of it from across the room. We'll streamline the pipeline. We don't need legacy approval layers. We'll centralize vendor communication. He said those things with confidence. Confidence is dangerous when it's not backed by structure. Small delays started appearing, nothing dramatic at first. A vendor asking for clarification twice. A client call getting rescheduled. An integration test failing without clear reason, the kind of issues that don't trigger alarms until they stack. I didn't intervene. I logged every delay, every confusion point, every misstep, because CCP-17 didn't care about opinions. It cared about patterns. By the second day, legal responded to my email. Short, careful, no formal continuity reassignment has been filed at this time. Please advise if immediate action is required. I read it twice. Then I archived it. That was confirmation. The system now had a documented gap, and gaps are where control shifts. I opened a new document, Continuity Risk Notice. This one wasn't neutral, it was precise. I outlined the timeline, the role change, the lack of reassignment, the vendor confusion, the early indicators of operational strain, no emotion, just structure. Then I sent it to the board legal committee channel, not to Daniel, not to HR, to the one place that couldn't ignore it. Once that notice is filed, the process doesn't belong to management anymore. It belongs to governance. I closed my laptop and leaned back in the chair that still didn't adjust properly. Around me, the office sounded normal. Phones. Conversations. Light laughter. But underneath it, the system had already started reacting. Quietly. And once governance starts paying attention, it doesn't look away. Daniel didn't slow down. If anything, he moved faster. 2 days after my reassignment, he held a team-wide meeting in the main conference room. Glass walls, bright screens. The kind of setup designed to make decisions feel bigger than they are. I sat in the back, not invited, just not excluded. He stood at the front with Ryan beside him, clicking through slides filled with clean diagrams and simplified workflows. We're removing friction, Daniel said, modernizing integration. No more bottlenecks. Ryan nodded like he had built the system himself. At one point, Daniel glanced toward me, just for a second. Scarlett helped lay the groundwork, he said, but we're moving forward with a more scalable model. Helped. Past tense. I didn't react. Because while he was talking about scalability, vendors were already asking questions he couldn't answer. After the meeting, I went back to my desk and opened my inbox. 4 new messages. 3 vendors. 1 client. All asking the same thing in different words. Who is authorized now? Please confirm transition documentation. We cannot proceed without named approval. I logged each one. time. Sender. Language. Pattern. Across the floor, Ryan was on a call, voice tight but trying to stay confident. No, we've centralized approvals. Yes, you can proceed. No, that won't be an issue. It was already an issue. He just didn't know where. By the afternoon, the first real crack showed. A mid-level vendor refused to push a scheduled integration update. Not because they wanted to delay, but because their contract required confirmation from the designated continuity holder. That was still me. Daniel overrode it. I saw the internal message. Proceed without delay. Approval granted at leadership level. Leadership level. That phrase sounds strong until you realize it doesn't mean anything in a contract. The vendor responded within 20 minutes. We require named authorization per agreement. Please confirm compliance before proceeding. I added it to the log. Daniel didn't. Instead, he called another meeting, smaller this time. Closed door. I wasn't in it, but I didn't need to be. The walls were thin enough. This is resistance, he said. They'll adjust. Someone, probably from legal, said something I couldn't fully hear. Daniel cut them off. We're not slowing down for legacy clauses. Legacy clauses. That was the moment I stopped wondering if he might correct course. He wouldn't, because to him, the problem wasn't structure. It was people not moving fast enough. By the next morning, a major client flagged an issue. Integration inconsistencies. Data wasn't syncing across systems. Nothing catastrophic yet, but enough to delay a rollout. Daniel blamed the old framework. The legacy setup is causing friction, he said in a call I was accidentally still looped into. We're fixing it. He wasn't fixing it. He was removing the parts he didn't understand, and every time he did, the system lost another layer of stability. I kept logging. Vendor refusal. Client delay. Unauthorized override. Missing reassignment. Each one a small piece. Together a pattern. By the end of the day, one of our larger vendors sent something different. Not a question. A notice. Formal language. Careful tone. Requesting confirmation that Virexin was still in compliance with continuity terms outlined in the integration agreement. That's not a casual message. That's the kind of message companies send when they're preparing to protect themselves. I read it once. Then saved it. Daniel thought he was pushing through resistance. What he was actually doing was building the case against himself. And the system was starting to respond. The failure didn't happen all at once. It started like most real problems do. Quiet. Then it showed up where no one could ignore it. 3 days after the vendor notice, a major client rollout stalled mid-deployment. This wasn't a small account. This was one of the companies that justified our valuation, the kind of client that gets executive attention the moment something feels off. Their system didn't sync. Data pipelines froze halfway through the transfer. Permissions didn't match. Integration checkpoints failed in sequence, like a row of switches flipping the wrong way. It wasn't random, it was structural. And it traced back to the exact layer Daniel had overridden. The escalation came fast. First to account management, then to operations. Then straight to executive leadership. By noon, the tension on the floor had changed. Conversations got quieter, doors stayed closed longer. I watched it all from the same shared desk. No one asked me anything. Not yet. Daniel called an emergency call with the client. I wasn't on it. But I didn't need to be. The outcome was obvious from the emails that followed. Immediate clarification required. Integration inconsistency at critical stage, potential breach of continuity protocol. That last line mattered because once a client uses the word breach, legal gets involved. And once legal gets involved, everything slows down. Even Daniel. An hour later, an internal message went out. Legal review initiated. That was the first official acknowledgement. Not from me, from the system. Daniel tried to contain it. I saw the attempt. He sent a message to HR asking about temporary reassignment options for my role. Temporary, like it could be reversed quietly. Like the last 3 days hadn't already been documented. HR replied with something careful. Please coordinate with legal due to potential compliance implications. That was a polite way of saying it was no longer his decision. By late afternoon, I received an email directly. From the Board Legal Committee. Subject line, Continuity Status Clarification Request. Short. Direct. Please confirm your current role status, access level, and involvement in ongoing integration operations. Include any documentation relevant to recent changes. I read it once. Then I opened my folder. Everything was already there. The demotion, the lack of reassignment, the vendor responses, the system logs, the risk notice. I didn't add anything new. I didn't need to. I replied with exactly what they asked for. Clear, structured, time-stamped, no emotion, just facts. When I hit send, I felt the shift. Not dramatic, not loud, but real. This wasn't an internal issue anymore. It had moved into governance, and once something reaches that level, it doesn't get buried. An hour later, a calendar invite went out across senior leadership. Emergency review, mandatory attendance. Daniel was on it, so was I. The subject line was simple. Continuity risk assessment. That's not a meeting you schedule unless something has already gone wrong. And by the time people sit down in that room, the outcome is usually already forming. I closed my laptop and looked around the office. Same desks, same people, same noise. But underneath it, the structure had shifted. Daniel still thought he was in control. But control doesn't come from titles. It comes from the parts of the system that can't be ignored. And his had just been flagged. The boardroom was colder than usual. Not the temperature, the air. You can tell when a room is no longer about discussion, when it's about correction. I walked in 5 minutes early, habit. The long table was already set, printed packets at each seat, water glasses untouched. The screen at the front showing a frozen title slide, continuity risk assessment. Daniel was there, standing near the window, talking quietly to someone from legal. His posture was tight, controlled, but I could see it in his shoulders. He didn't expect this to go this far. When he noticed me, he gave a short nod, not dismissive this time. Just careful. I took a seat halfway down the table, not at the end, not at the head. I didn't need the position. By the time the rest of the board filtered in, the room had settled into that kind of silence where every movement feels louder than it should. The meeting started without small talk. Daniel went first. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and launched into a summary that tried to make everything sound contained. Minor integration delays, he said. Temporary vendor misalignment. We're already implementing a more efficient structure. Efficient. He kept his tone steady, confident. Like if he said it clean enough, it would hold. Someone from the board asked, were continuity protocols followed during the role transition? Daniel paused for half a second. We're in the process of formalizing those updates, he said. In the process. That's the kind of answer that works, until someone has the timeline. Legal spoke next. Not loudly, just clearly. There is no record of a filed continuity reassignment notice, they said. Additionally, multiple vendors have flagged authorization inconsistencies tied to designated personnel clauses. The room shifted, not visibly, but you could feel it. Daniel started to respond, but the board chair raised a hand. Let's hear from Miss Marlowe. That was the first time my name had been used in the room, not as a reference, as a source. I didn't stand right away. I opened the folder in front of me, even though I already knew what was inside. Then I looked up. "My name is Scarlett Marlowe," I said, steady. "Head of integration and vendor continuity until 3 days ago." No one interrupted. I was reassigned without formal notice, without a documented transition, and without vendor communication. My system access was restricted at 10:14 a.m. on Monday. No continuity reassignment was filed before or after that point. I slid the first document forward. Here are the access logs. Then the next. Vendor responses requesting named authorization. And the next. Client escalation referencing continuity protocol. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I just placed each piece where it belonged. Structure. Under Continuity Control Provision CCP 17, I continued removal of a designated continuity holder without transition, combined with operational risk indicators, triggers a governance review window, legal nodded slightly. Confirmation. I kept going. That window is now active. There it was. Not dramatic, but final. Daniel shifted in his seat. For the first time since I'd met him, he didn't have an immediate response. "Are you stating that control provisions have been triggered?" one of the board members asked. "I'm stating that the conditions outlined in CCP 17 have been met," I said, "and that documentation has been submitted accordingly." The room went quiet, not confused. Processing. Because once something is framed correctly, people see it. The board chair leaned back slightly, hands folded. "Daniel," he said, without looking at him, "step out for a moment, that's the line, the one that changes everything." Daniel hesitated, just for a second. Then he stood, gathered his papers, and walked out without saying a word. The door closed behind him with a soft click. And just like that, the conversation shifted away from him, toward me. Once Daniel left the room, the tone changed, not softer, more precise. The board wasn't asking if there was a problem anymore. They were asking how far it had gone. Legal summarized quickly. Continuity clause active. Documentation valid. Vendor risk confirmed. Client impact measurable. Everything aligned. The kind of alignment that doesn't happen by accident. The board chair looked at me again. "Miss Marlowe, what is your recommendation?" That question matters, because it tells you where control actually sits. I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't know, but because timing matters. "Stabilization first," I said. "Vendor communication needs to be corrected immediately. Authorized contact must be reestablished under contract terms. Integration checkpoints need to be restored to their original sequence." Simple, direct, no blame, just function. "And leadership?" another board member asked. I met their gaze. "Leadership decisions created the gap," I said. "So leadership needs to be adjusted to close it," no one argued. Because by then, it wasn't personal, it was structural. The board moved quickly after that. Interim control measures. Temporary authority shift under CCP 17. Review of executive decisions tied to integration. Daniel wasn't brought back into the room. Not that day. By the time the meeting ended, the outcome was already in motion. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't need to. The structure spoke for me. Over the next week, things corrected fast. Vendor relationships were restored. Not because I demanded it, but because contracts required it. Clients stabilized, not because of apologies, but because systems started working again. And leadership shifted. Daniel was removed quietly. No announcement. No dramatic exit, just absence. His name disappeared from internal directories the same way mine had, only this time it was final. The board offered to reinstate my role. Same title, same office, same structure. I declined. Not out of emotion, out of clarity. I'll remain involved at the governance level, I said. Continuity oversight. Advisory capacity. They agreed. Because now they understood what that meant. On my terms. A week later, I walked back into the boardroom. Same table, same chairs. But this time, I wasn't there as an employee. I was there as a controlling stakeholder. The shared desk was still downstairs. Unchanged, I passed it on my way in. Didn't stop, didn't look. Because the truth was simple. I had never been the person sitting at that desk. I had always been the structure holding the room above it together. They just didn't see it until removing me forced them to. If you've ever been in a place where your value is invisible, remember this: systems don't forget who actually holds them up. People do. And when they do, the correction is never loud. But it is always final. If you've lived through something like this, you already know how it ends. And if you haven't, pay attention. Because the signs are always there.